guys, it's Megan here and Scott with our 5th episode of From the Ground Up, our podcast about autism, faith, and family. Scott, how's your week been this week so far?
Megan, it's October in Texas, and October is the reason to be in Texas. So we finally have gotten some cool weather. It's really pretty, and it's perfect football weather. So it's been really nice. And I've got a special weekend coming up. I've got both daughters coming in for the weekend. And son-in-laws. Let me mention son-in-laws are going to be there too. Daughters and son-in-laws. It's going to be a lot of fun. Should have a great time to be a family
Good.
this
I know
weekend.
Colby's going to love that too. He loves having everybody under the same roof at one time.
He really does. How about you? What's going on?
We just started back from fall break. We had a whole week off last week, my kids did, which, I mean, I don't know if you remember when you were in school, but we never got a whole week off during the fall. We got, maybe a Friday, half day on Fridays. So this whole, they need a week off, it's for the birds, in my opinion. But we went up to my parents' house. They live about an hour and a half north of where we're at. And my dad is hot and heavy into harvest. And so the boys spent their week in the combine, in the tractors, in the semis, all the things. And they were in heaven for sure.
Sounds like they probably learned a lot more there than they ever did in
Oh,
school.
yes.
So they learned a lot from your father, I'm sure.
I know that I'm so blessed to have two parents that are so heavily involved in my kids' lives. They love it. And so it's just my favorite place in the fall, honestly, to be in. It's called the buddy seat of my dad's combine. I could sit in there and ride with him all day, listen to stories, and just at his age, how physically active he still is, and he has to be, obviously, in what he does. So I'm just super blessed in that.
Before we turn the recording on, I know you and I were talking about how excited we are for this particular podcast, because we're going to be covering a lot of stuff. Going to talk a little bit about insurance, but we're also going to be talking about some very deep faith issues that I think are real critical for people that are dealing with autism and some family issues as well. So we're probably going to just need to go ahead and get started, Megan. Listen, and I know that we're in the second episode of our insurance. We're trying to take people along as far as here's what insurance means and what you can do. Do you want to give a little bit of an overview about what, or maybe just jump right in? What do people know as far as like the second step of insurance when it comes to having a child with autism?
Absolutely. So last week we just did really quick, high level, what the basic understanding of insurance in general is. This week I wanted to talk a little bit more about the diagnosis piece that has to come along with insurance coverage for autism. And one of the things I have learned a lot of families don't necessarily understand is there are two different diagnoses that can come with autism. What I mean by that is your child can have an autism diagnosis through the school district, which is considered an educational diagnosis. And then they can also have a diagnosis through a doctor, which is considered a medical diagnosis. Let's say your kid's in school, they're maybe in kindergarten, first grade, and the school says, we have some concerns, we'd like to evaluate your child. They do all the evaluation steps, and lo and behold, they come back and your child has a diagnosis of autism. That's considered an educational diagnosis, which means your child can access educational services through the school district. That doesn't necessarily mean that insurance is going to cover any outside therapies or treatment. And
Okay.
they would have to then take that information to a medical doctor and say, hey, this is what we received through the school district. Can you refer us for a psychologist or additional testing so that we can get a medical diagnosis so that we can access additional services? So I think that's one thing I've had families come to us and say they have their diagnosis through the school, and just helping them understand and navigate. There really actually are two paths when it comes to that diagnosis piece.
And you would expect a medical diagnosis to be a much deeper dive, right? There's a lot more testing, a lot more involved in that, where an educational diagnosis is probably based on a couple of people's opinion, and that's about it.
Yes,
right?
and the other piece of it is too, I also known children that may have a medical diagnosis of autism, but they don't necessarily qualify for an educational diagnosis. What that means is their deficits within that diagnosis don't impede their learning in the school setting. A lot of higher functioning kids that maybe just struggle with social skills or social interactions, those kids are the ones that kind of teeter on that line of the schools. They don't really qualify for any educational supports, but the parents can still seek a medical diagnosis and look for social skills courses, some ABA, speech, working on some different social pragmatic type things with them. So it's not necessarily one or the other. You can absolutely have both and look into both. The next thing I wanted to talk about after we decide, okay, yes, my child does have a medical diagnosis of autism. The next step is to really look in and dive into your insurance policy. Basic question to ask is, does my policy cover autism? Does my policy cover treatment of autism, or does it just cover testing and assessment? I've actually seen insurance policies that will cover treatment of autism, but they don't cover the testing or the assessment, which actually blows my mind. They'll pay for the treatment, but they won't pay for the assessment to get the treatment, right?
Okay, thanks.
So diving into that insurance policy and really looking in at what the pieces of it entail is really important. And I always really recommend to parents, I can't stress this enough, get this information in writing. If that means you're calling and talking to your insurance company, have them fax you or email you a copy, send you a copy of your policy so that you can actually have it in writing. Because in the unfortunate event you have to work through an appeals process, everything has to be done in writing, and you have a better foot to stand on when you do have that information in writing.
Can I make this recommendation for those that are on this path? I might suggest go ahead and get a binder that's going to be that child's binder, and everything that involves insurance or medical goes into that single binder so that you've got that at your fingertips at all times. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to have the kind of organization that you need to have with all of this information as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've actually created a roadmap for families that really goes through these step-by-step pieces of information they need to get from the insurance company so they can put it in that binder. That could be one of the first pieces of documentation that they have in that binder. And it'll walk them through the questions they need to ask, things they need to inquire about their policies.
And that's on their website, Megan. We might want to go ahead and give a pitch for that.
Yes.
So that's on the website,
yes.
right? Where could they find
Yeah, it's on
that?
my website, and I'll also put it in the show notes that we've got down here below in the description of our show. So they will be able to access that for sure. The other part of that, talking through that, is next steps. Okay, we've gotten my policy. I want to know, what are some of the things I need to ask about my policy? We need to determine, is there a referral required? Does my policy require me to have somebody refer me to a specialist? Do I have to get a referral for speech? Do I have to get a referral for OT? Do I have to get a referral for ABA? What does that look like? And then a lot of times where insurance companies will get you, they will put limitations on it. They will give you 60 visits a year or 90 visits a year. So asking the questions of, does my policy have any visit limitations? Does it have limitations to speech, OT, ABA? Are there any limitations on location? So maybe they'll pay for it in clinic, but they won't pay for it in home or vice versa. And then also finding out if there's any lifetime limits or yearly caps. Some policies I've seen will say we're only going to pay for $60,000 a year of ABA. If anybody knows the cost of ABA, that's going to get your child through maybe 3 months. Right. So those are hiccups that if families don't ask those questions on the front end, can really cause challenges and problems as that child's really making progress and working hard through that treatment. So those are things to really know on the front end of the policy.
I remember when Colby was going through speech, we found out that he had 20 speech sessions, but they had to be consecutive days. So you even have to look at what the time frame that you can have, because not all, you would think I could spread this out based on what his need is. He doesn't need to go every single day, but that's the way it was set up. You've got to look at all the fine print in these things, because how many times a week can you have that therapy? Things like that, Megan.
And I've seen policies that have a yearly limit of combination of 60 visits of OT and PT and speech. That's, if you've got a kiddo that's in OT and PT, that's 30 visits a year for each of those. That's less than one time a week. So how effective is that really going to be for that child? And so I mentioned all these limitations, but I do want to, I feel like we're being really Debbie Downers right now talking about all these things, but
okay.
I do want to give a little bit of a positive note with this. There has been a team of attorneys and BCBAs and advocates that have worked for years and years, and they've literally gone to each state and advocated for autism benefits to be equal to other services. So what we were seeing is a lot of kids or a lot of policies were having significantly unrealistic limitations for autism when it was compared to other treatments from a medical standpoint. They actually, I want to say it was in 2019, finally passed the 50th state, what they call autism state mandates. And so every state in the United States has an autism state mandate. And what that means is there are mandates that have been passed through the government that have said, no, you can't put these limitations on it because it's not right, it's not fair. And so it's really important for families to know what their state autism state mandate states or says. And again, I'll put the link in our notes here, and then it's also on my website that they can navigate to find what their state mandate is, because then you can use that information and say, hey, insurance company, I don't know if you're aware, but the autism state mandate in Indiana says that you can't limit visits. So what are you going to do about it? And those are fun conversations to have. And you get the representative on the other line that's, I don't even know what you're talking about. Send me to your supervisor. It's great. I'll have a conversation about it.
I'll get to know
Yeah.
them real well over the next several weeks.
Educational opportunity. Let's go.
Yeah.
But that's another great resource in addition to some other things we've mentioned, I think is really important for parents to know. But you can find a lot of information on the website. It's www.autismlegalresourcecenter.com. It's a really cumulative place of a ton of very valuable legal documents, resources, state mandates, studies, and things that have overturned a lot of these things, and another good resource that I'd love to share with parents. But that's all I got. I'm really ready to dive into our faith piece of this, Scott, if you really want to know the truth.
Okay, last thing, because it's the most important point, and that is always get in writing. Let's just mention this one more time. Get everything in writing and start building that binder, because you're going to need to have that to be able to navigate
Yes.
this. Okay, so just go ahead and plan on having all that in one place. And then let's talk about this
Yep.
faith piece, Megan.
I'm going to add one more
Go
thing
ahead.
before we shift, because
Okay.
I know that parents or people will experience, they can't send it to me in writing. Okay, great. Can I have your name and your reference number for this call so that I can reference this whenever I have to talk with or file an appeal? So if they're not willing to give you documentation in writing, definitely get their name, and they will always have a reference number for a phone call. So name, date, time, reference number, and that's your documentation and support for that information that you received on that call.
Worst case, if you've got notes and you can say, here's my notes from the call, where's your notes? You're going to win that argument, right? Whoever comes to court better prepared is the one that's going to win. So, might as well come prepared. Let me ask this, May, because I know my piece here, but what is it about this that you find is so important for people to understand when it comes to faith and autism and dealing with some of the disappointments and the frustrations and the challenges from a faith angle in autism? What's been your experience?
I think that people, I think they view our God as a punishing God and that they've done something wrong. And that's not the case at all. He is not a punishing God. He's a loving God. And he's not the one that causes things to happen, right? You brought a really great point up the other night when we were talking of God's not in control. And
He never says that in the Bible, by the way, people. We say that all the time, but I've looked, I can't find it where he says he's in control. In fact, if anything, he says we're in a spiritual battle. There's a war going on. You don't control wars. The other side has a say in this as well, right? So we don't control wars. And I don't think God promised that.
I think as Christians, we just think that, and people outside looking at Christians and think that we don't have problems, like we don't have struggles, and that's not the case at all. I think that our perspective is just completely shifted so that our hope lies in a different place. And it puts things that help us shift that perspective in a light of, okay, this is not fun, this is challenging, this is really hard, but what am I supposed to be learning from it? How is this supposed to be a blessing? How am I supposed to turn this around? Because you can find something positive in every day and everything.
The thing that I always like to point out, and this is where I can be a little bit critical, but in today's Christianity, Western-centered evangelical Christianity today, I tend to find that we use what I refer to as bookstore Christianity, right? And bookstore Christianity is when we take all of these phrases out of the Bible and we try to put the most positive spin on it and apply it to the situations that we're in today. And I'm just going to take one example, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We use that to glorify our ability to score a touchdown or do well on a test or something like that, when really it was written to a population that was suffering incredible hardship at the time. And I'm not even sure that the right translation isn't, I can endure all things through Christ, meaning I can endure the challenges that I have because Christ strengthens me in those. Not that I don't have these challenges, and it's not like I'm designed to accomplish great things. It's just I can endure the challenges that I have. the one of the challenges I wanted to talk about is, and good people all around us want to say nice things to us and want to say encouraging things to us. And in Christianity today, we like to put a little happy bow on everything. And you're gonna be faced with people that are telling you things like, this is just part of God's plan. And I'm going to use that term real loosely because in the Bible, God doesn't have a plan for us in a specific sense. He has a purpose for us. He has a reason for us. He has things that he wants for us, but it's not a plan. And let me just say, you can get wrapped up in bad theology thinking God just wants me to have an autistic child. And you can end up in a bad place thinking that way. I remember somebody telling me God knew what he was doing when he gave you an autistic child because you and Julie do such a great job. You know what? It's nice to hear that. But if you start internalizing that kind of thinking, it can really mess with how you view God. And there was several years where I really went through some struggles thinking that God was, I wouldn't say punishing me, but God, why is this happening? And why is this bad thing happen? And you have to realize that in a lot of ways, Satan is looking to increase the promises of God or to distort the promises of God and make it seem like God says that you should really have this right here. And then here's the reality of God, right? And the more that he can increase what we think God should be giving to us versus our reality, that gap, that's where the devil likes to play. And that's where the devil likes to really be tempting us and cause us confusion. One of the things I'd like to talk about is when you're going down this path, you have to be very realistic and hold to what God's promises really are and not what other people are going to tell you what God's promises are that are really a false theology. I'm sorry, I'm getting on my
No,
soapbox. Let me slow down here for a
we
second.
are there side by side. I promise you that.
Maybe let people absorb that for a moment, okay? Just take that in, that when you can't let other people set God's your expectations of God, because they will, in a lot of times, in an unwitting manner, they will set them too high, and you'll find yourself disappointed. And that's a great way to find yourself separated from God. And go
I
ahead.
think another one, Scott, that we hear people say a lot is God will not give you more than you can handle. If we could handle on our own, we wouldn't need God, right? So why would he give us something that we don't need him for?
Right.
He brings us into this world and gives us purpose. And so he wants us to walk with him. So why would he give us something that we don't
Yes.
need him for, right? And
Right.
that comes obviously from 1 Corinthians 10:13, where it talks about he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you're tempted, he will also provide a way out so you can endure it. If you read that whole passage, it's Paul writing to the church of Corinth. And prior to those verses, he's talking about sin. And instead
Yes.
of he doesn't use temptation. So temptation is separate than sin, right? He's talking about
Mhm.
sin specifically. So in that verse, when he says temptation, it should really say sin. God doesn't
Mhm.
say we're not going to be tempted. That's day in, day out, daily, hourly, moment by moment.
Or face hardship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we think that and we're like, oh, why is he? Oh, then we get on the other side. We're like, oh, I can handle this, right? I don't need God. He's given me something. He thinks I can handle it. That's I should be able to do this. And so that's not the case at all. I think a better verse to really support that is to look at 2 Corinthians 12:7-10, where we talk about God's grace and how abundant it is. And it just says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me. That's why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And so that talks about all of those hard things that God is helping us through and supporting us through. It's not us doing it on our own. We can do those things because of him and because of his grace and his promises to us.
Yeah. And I think going back to this is just the idea that God has never promised that he's going to heal every wound or that he's going to right every wrong. That's not what he's promised. He's promised that he's going to come alongside us and encourage us. And he's going to use the difficulties in our life to bring glory and honor to Him. And if you can look at this path of autism as an opportunity for God, just like this verse in John that we use is, it's for God to be glorified. It's for God to be glorified. And whatever difficult situation I'm walking in, I just start to keep thinking is, how's God going to be glorified by this? And if you look around, you'll see it. And it may take a little time to get there. The other thing that I want to encourage people is life is like a book with a lot of chapters. And maybe it's because I'm approaching 60 that I can say this. I got a few chapters behind me, okay? And what I'm finding is the chapters are coming faster and faster. But I can now look back and I can look at chapter 3 and chapter 4 and realize that chapter 3 and chapter 4 are responsible for the person that I think I am in chapter 15 and 16, which is a stronger, more faithful person. I wouldn't be that person if it wasn't for chapters 3 and 4. But in chapters 3 and 4, I just didn't see chapter 15
Mhm.
and 16 coming. And if I can encourage any parent that's out there today, is just realize that there's some more chapters coming. And you just have to be patient. They just haven't been written yet. They're out there. And when you get a chance to get a little bit further on in life and look back, you'll see God was making you into something and something special. And He just needed some time to do it. And you've got to be patient with it. I don't know. This is, like I said, it's been real concerning to me because I just know the struggles that I had for several years. And I also just want to let people know, if you're in that dark place and you're challenged by it, there's hope out there. And let me encourage you. We've said this, Megan, we'd love to hear from you. If there's somebody out there that's listening to this, please respond to us. I'd be more than happy to pray with you. I'd be more than happy to give you a phone call, just talk you through what I've learned. Um, because again, we think that faith is an important part of this process, this autism process. You can't just be focused on the therapies that you're going through. You've got to be looking at how God's going to be using this to glorify Him. Anything else on that, Megan, that we need to
I
talk
just think,
about?
Scott, that
I,
we should also say you and I, we're realists. So people call us and we're not gonna paint a pretty picture for you. We're gonna let you
no,
just let it all out. I
yeah,
can't tell you how many times I sat across from parents and I'm not gonna paint them a pretty picture. They're having a rough day. You let it out. I'm here for you. You
yes,
say whatever you need to say. Zero judgment from us.
yeah,
Because we've seen the walks that people have gone through, but we've also seen them, like you said, in chapter 2 and 3, and then we get to see them in chapter 15 and 16 and offer that help, that hope.
yes, yeah. And to transition a little bit, because this thing on faith also affects how families operate. And one of the things that I've seen, and I've joined some of the autism support groups and things like that, I get to see some postings. And one of the things that I find myself, I don't know, drawn to, just and a little bit frustrated and confused by, is that there's a lot of people in the autism community that are constantly trying to compare their lives to the lives of what I would refer to as typical families, right? And it can be very frustrating because as an autistic family, your normal is going to be different than any other normal that's out there. And it even includes other autistic families. I can tell you what my normal looks like as an autistic parent, but it's going to be even different than your normal. And you have to work toward your normal and not be comparing yourself to other people's normal. One of the things that I noted too is there's a grieving process that we go through. And I don't believe that you've truly accepted that your child has autism until you can recognize that your normal is going to be different. Because there's a period, and it can be a couple of years, where you're still fighting. You're fighting to raise a different child than the one you have. You're trying to raise that child that you still are holding on to and still dreaming of. And I'm not talking about hope. I think we can never let go of hope, but we're still just trying to fight for that child to fit this picture of what we want them to be. And it's not until we stop trying to raise that child and we go, okay, this is the child I've got. This is the child I've got to focus on raising. This is what I've got to have normal look like. It's not till that point that you start to have peace in your family and you start to be able to gel around that. And maybe we can talk. What are some things that you think people have to accept as normal in an autistic family? Because you've seen it, Megan. What are some things that you know that you've seen?
So there's one thing that I've had a lot of kids that their routines maybe look different, right? And so I don't know about you, but I thrive on a routine and schedule. I relate to kids on the spectrum in that way because I thrive in that being able to anticipate and know what's going to happen and when, and we go to the same place to eat every Wednesday night, or we
And it's
it's
always Mexican
Mexican.
food, Megan. We're talking about my son, Colby. He eats Mexican food twice a week. It has to be on Wednesday night and it has to be on Sunday after church. And God bless him. That's just, that's our
Yep.
normal. Our normal is to do
Chicken
that.
nuggets, French
Now,
fries, and Diet Coke, right?
and in fact, even that, there's a lot of conflict about what kids eat on the spectrum. And my thinking has been, we spend a lot of, and again, a lot of it's just, hey, I was raised in a family that said you had to eat everything on your plate, or I was raised in a family that said you had to eat all your vegetables. That's not the family you're living in right now. You're living in a family where your child deals with food issues. And it's not a matter of imposing your will on that child and making them do what you think they should do. It's that when they put that food in their mouth, it just
Mhm,
disgusts them, or it's just complete. It's horrible. It's like razor
mhm,
blades in their mouth. So why force them to do that when they can find a normal over here that comforts them, that they're comfortable with? It's just
mhm.
different though,
Yep.
right? Their food normal
Mhm,
is different. The other thing is schedule. I know with Colby, that a lot of autistic families struggle with this because they've got all these other things going on, and autistic kids need structure and need a schedule. And we just had to get into the idea at 8:15, our son takes a shower, and at 9 o'clock he goes to bed, and you can set your
mhm,
watch by it. Now, that's not every autistic kid needs that kind of schedule, but that's the kind of schedule Colby needed so that he could feel comfortable in his skin and so that he could work around. And that's been our life. That's our life 7 days a week. Sometimes we can stay out a little bit later, but not too much longer. We can't break that. You get out of that rhythm, he gets real
yeah.
uncomfortable. You stay in that rhythm, he stays real comfortable. But that's what our normal looks like. Other families going to have a different
I've
one.
worked with a family whose son, which I'm terrible at remembering birthdays and anniversary. I'm horrible at it. This is a gift I've known a lot of kids to have that I actually wish I could have. Um,
Yes.
they know birthdays, they know anniversaries, and so there's one little guy I worked with, and he would he had a calendar and he would write it in there and he would remember. And that morning, the first thing he would do would go into his mom's room before she's awake, and he's right in his face, and he'd say, "July 8th. Miss Megan's birthday today." When that's what mom's opening her eyes to, but she could prepare herself of, okay, somebody's birth she would look at the calendar, so he didn't scare her that
Yeah.
morning, but the joy that he would get in that, and so excited that was a special day for somebody else. Maybe it means that we go to a certain store at a certain time, or we have to go in a certain routine when we go to the grocery store, or we only buy this item from this store, those sort of things, and sometimes families take those pieces as something that, okay, this is something that we need to work on or we need to fix, and asking the why. Is it impeding your child, or is it something because you're not comfortable with? Like, help walking them through that, and that
Mhm.
perspective shift, I think, is also very important. Of when you can shift, of, okay, that's why. This is why they do it, or this is why it
Right.
helps them. So yeah, let's continue doing that. I think for we're getting to the holidays, and I think it's important we note that the holidays are stressful for everybody, but families with kids on the spectrum, there's just a next level of stress, especially if you have kids that have very limited interests. So mom and dad have this guilt of, what do I get Johnny? Because Johnny doesn't play with toys, but Sally does and Sue does. So what am I going to get Johnny? And there's that parent guilt, right? Then you as a
Mhm.
parent may know that they're not maybe going to open as many gifts, but we're going to go do a lot more like activities. We're going to go to more movies. We're going to go do more activities with them versus having tangible items for them at Christmas. So that's what that normal may look like.
Or even spreading those gifts
Mhm.
out over a little bit longer period of time. They don't necessarily need them all in one day. They don't know what to do with them all in one day. That's
I was
true
going
of
to say
all
that's
kids, but
all
yeah,
children.
but yeah, we can be critical of what we
Mhm.
do with Christmas anyway, but you just have to say, maybe we can spread these gifts out over a period because they need that space. They don't need everything at once, and that's okay. I think the biggest challenge is there's parents that just want to have this picture of what it's supposed to be and impose their will And I think if you have that kind of, I'm going to impose my will or I'm going to discipline the autism out of them, that's it. You're fighting a bad battle there. You just have to learn how to accept them as they are and work with them as they are. And that doesn't mean that they can't make improvements and you can't shape behavior and all that stuff. It's just realizing that it's going to be different than it is with all of the other kids, and your expectations have to be completely different.
And when you can figure out maybe why they're doing what they're doing or why they thrive on that, then maybe you can figure out a replacement or an alternative they can do instead. Sometimes
Right.
you've got kids that engage in some physical repetitive behaviors. And once you figure out why they're doing that, what's something else they could do that would be the same or similar, give them the same feedback they're seeking, but maybe it doesn't include a certain item or whatnot. And I've walked tons of families through those different types of things of just that perspective shift of they're doing this and this is why. And to say, okay, how can we shift that?
Yeah.
Perfect example. I've got a little guy that I worked with who would tap on the walls, and he was tapping on the walls to the pattern of train lights of a train crossing. And so it was disruptive to a lot of his activities throughout the day. And so I told mom, he's obviously needing that input. He needs to hear that train feedback. That is reinforcing to him. He really likes that. So what are some things we can do instead? We got him crossing guard color pages and toys. And so he could engage with those things instead of tapping on the wall. He was still getting what he needed, was the exposure to that pattern, that sound, those lights, but it was just in ways that were a little bit more appropriate. So that when they go out to restaurants, guess what? He gets a color page with a crossing arms on it. And he does that instead of going around to the restaurant and patting on the walls. Just really, we're not taking away what he needs. We're just shifting him how he's accessing it.
Wow. That's great, Megan. Gosh, I know there's a lot of families out there right now that have something that they want to talk to you about, just right along those lines right there. Maybe we give a couple other things that people can follow up with. And by the way, we just launched our first episode this last weekend. Feedback's been real positive. If you're getting something from these episodes, we would love to hear from you. If it's been a blessing or if you need some clarification on anything, please email us. What's our email address, Megan?
It is autismfaithfamily. You can contact me directly at haupertconsultingllc@gmail.com. They also check out my website, which is haupertconsulting.com. And then we also have our Facebook pages, Haupert Consulting, and we've got our From the Ground Up Autism Faith Family that they can contact us on as well.
And then the last thing I'd also like to point out is if you're in the Fort Worth area or North Tarrant County and are looking for a church home and you've got a special needs child, the Hills Church is dedicated to working with families with special needs kids. We have 3 campuses, one in West Fort Worth, one in North Richland Hills, and the campus that I attend is in Keller. This last weekend, we had our respite night. So we had lots of families that were members and non-members had a chance to be able to drop their kid off at siblings and drop them off and have them occupied with a great program for 3 hours. Julie and I got a chance to go do a little window shopping and have dinner together and just be able to talk like adults. It was a really nice situation for us. And then we also have a Sunday morning program. If you would like to more information about that, you can contact the Hills or you can contact me and I'll put you in contact with someone at the Hills. We'd love, if you're seeking a church home, love to be able to introduce you to what we have to offer for you. So with that, Megan, anything else we need to cover tonight?
I don't think so. I think next week, I just want to encourage everybody to tune in. We're going to talk a little bit more about insurance and the Mental Health Parity Act. It sounds super boring, but it's a lot of information that will be incredibly beneficial for families to know about as they're diving into autism benefits and the insurance navigation piece of it all.
For those of you who are listening, thank you. Really appreciate you being a part of this, and I hope that we've been able to bless you.
Thanks, guys.